Hello and welcome to this episode of Beat Teacher Burnout. I'm so excited today because I've got Ross McGill here from Teacher Toolkit, and I know loads of you will have heard about him because he's just involved in so many amazing things around education. And so, without further ado, Ross, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us why you're on here today and perhaps a little bit of your story?
Thanks, Rowena. Hello, everyone. I like talking about education full stop. I think I can find any connection to teaching and learning, regardless of the content in the world. It runs through my blood. So anyone that wants to talk about teaching, I'm there for it. My backstory is I started teaching when I was 17, back in the days when I guess safeguard and all those kind of things weren't a thing. My sixth form teacher spotted that I loved design technology. He spotted that I had a natural passion for younger kids. And looking back, actually, it's probably a great workload hack for him. He got me teaching his own year 7 and 6th form classes early on. So that's where it started, really. So I did that for obviously a couple of years during my A-level years, off to college in Southeast London. And yeah, the rest is history. I think I did 25 years, right up to deputy headship in a large secondary school. And at the same time, started blogging in 2007. At the time, it was just a diary, no one read it, updating what I was up to, what I was thinking about teaching every half-term holiday. And then, as the blogging world started to emerge, people read it from all around the world. So I thought, well, I'm getting some feedback here quicker than I'm getting from teachers next door in my own school. So, now 21 million readers later and everyone's on a Substack or some kind here or there. Although our attention economy is shifting, the traffic still on Teacher Toolkit's enormous. And, whether you type in adaptive teaching or something else, Teacher Toolkit will be on the first page of Google. So I've learned how to code really well, an HTML language, all these obscure things that you learn from just doing something you love has led me to where I am today. So Teacher Toolkit's all over the internet, and it's enhanced my career stroke wisdom. And there's always more things to learn, but in terms of teaching and learning, I'm in a good place in terms of contributing, learning, connecting, and things like that. And here I am today.
Amazing. So, without using any technical language through the next sort of 26 minutes, Ross, if you can, because you're speaking to about the least technical person in the world.
Okay.
Noted. Right. Thank you. Can you tell us what it is? What's your experience of stress or exhaustion, even burnout in education?
Well, obviously, I think my own career, you look back and I remember a very stark conversation when I was a trainee teacher. Someone said, you're entering a very tough career. And it was kind of like, yeah, I get it. And you accept it. And then obviously you live it. And then you realize actually it's not acceptable. So you spend the first few years of your career just going through, right, this is how it is, marking, and this is, way back mid-90s where, there's no technology around. It was marking books and whatever the thing, the kind of trends were at the time and whatever Ofsted wanted, you just did it. I guess the big shift for me started to happen when I faced redundancy as a school leader. So not only trying to survive that stressful period, but trying to also pivot or thrive to an alternative career. So almost like, when you're in a job and you've got a new job to go to, you end up doing 2 jobs at once for a period of time. So it was a bit like that. But I health-wise got through all that, and I was a new father at the time. In fact, my boy was born extremely premature, so I actually took voluntary redundancy and went on garden leave just to support my wife and my young child while, we're in hospital for 3 months. But then another shift came towards a nasty Ofsted inspection when I was a deputy head teacher. And as you can imagine, working 80 to 100 hour plus a week, little pockets of signals from your body. So, I think I had blepharitis. There's a picture on my website somewhere where, you get an eye infection and your eye bubbles up or kind of swells up and things like that. So your body starts to tell you that you're not looking after yourself, you're working too hard, burning the candle. Your relationships start to get a bit frayed around the side with friends and at home. So you start to see the signals and you think, right, I'm in my early 40s at this point and I've got a young child and not seeing them. I probably did 1 school drop off a half term if I was lucky. And that's not right. So you start to think, right, there's got to be more important things in life. So you work out either to pivot to another space in education, or you try to redefine your working life. So I think before I took the decision to step out, I started to disconnect from apps on my device that kept, as a school leader, you can imagine you're constantly online resolving everyone else's problems, never mind your own. So I started to try and rebalance it by removing some of that connection from home to work, so that when I was at work, I was full on work, but when I was at home, I was full on at home. And I probably did that successfully for 3 or 4 years before I took a step out.
Wow, I love what you said about being fully at work when you're there and then fully at home when you're there. Because I remember a time where my youngest looked at me one day and she said, "Mum, finally you're giving me attention." And I thought to myself, no, I've been giving you attention every night for 1 hour. I sit in front of the TV with you. I'm on my laptop doing my school emails. We're watching TV together.
Yeah.
But she said, when my laptop broke that day, so there was no laptop, she said, "Finally, Mum, you're giving me your attention." And it
Yeah.
was such a wake up call to me that so many of us think we're giving our kids attention when we get home.
No, I think the world's about perspective, so obviously it's important to look at other, I run the risk even today that still there's the laptop on the sofa when you're supposed to watch the TV and switch off and things like that. And yeah, it's a really important point. Be present in that moment with the people that you're with.
Yeah, absolutely. So you started, I've got a couple of questions from what you've said already. One is, you mentioned right at the beginning that you were helping teach your design and technology classes with your sixth form teacher, and
Yes.
what a great workload hack he discovered at that point. So obviously workload is cited as one of the main reasons that teachers and leaders are leaving at the moment. What would you say to someone right now that might give them hope, or do you have an action they could take? What would you be saying? I mean, that's a huge question.
I
What would
would
you?
always say, as a first port of call, there are 32,000 schools in the UK, so choose carefully where you want to work. And I think back to probably the difficult points in my career when you start searching for another job. In hindsight, look for a new position when you're in a position of strength or happiness rather than a position of crisis. And that's easy to say because you can't really predict when a crisis might happen. So one tip that I used to always do religiously was every half term I'd update my CV with courses, things that I was researching, things like that. And just to always be ready, dress for the job that you're about to go for, not for the job you have, kind of saying. So I used to take that approach with my CV, be ready for your next job. And I wasn't, what's the phrase, kind of career hungry. I didn't want to be at the top. I mean, as the closer I got to the top, I realized I didn't want to be a head teacher. So I found myself as a deputy head, that the next stop is the head. So I was always ready for my next move. And I think, my Teacher Toolkit journey started. And, going back to the point about burnout and stuff, I used to get very frustrated, like most of us, about government rhetoric on the news. So I used to always explore the actual research, the documentation that was published, to discover that actually teachers leave after their first year of teaching, not within the first 5. You get all these kind of, it sounds softer, doesn't it? Teachers leave in the first 5 years. No, 15% of teachers leave in the first year, more greater than any other point in their career. And we lose 43,000 teachers every year, which is ridiculous. It's more teachers than in the British Navy. So we have a reoccurring crisis every year, but we tend to ignore it. So I started to get quite fascinated about teacher workload and teacher burnout. And I probably spent a good 10 years in my life as a deputy head and into Teacher Toolkit full-time, really starting to unpick the reasons. Life gets in the way. So is it mortgages, bereavement? Is it salary? Is it behavior in school? And it's a mixture of all those reasons. But I think the number one reason is the working hours. It exceeds the kind of contract. And, you and I probably qualified before emails. Think how long it takes you to write it or read it or delete an email in today's world. And it's just a given that you'll do it on your mobile phone or on your laptop at home with no, little compensation for that time or payment to your mobile provider and things like that. And then the hours required to just keep up with those communications on top of your 32.5 contracted hours. I mean, the world's changed and teaching's changed, but I guess the challenges remain the same. I guess the point is it's just a hard career, but there are some things that we could do collectively to try and reduce those headaches. But it's a constant shift in sand. You got AI now, so they got, when you look at the latest DFE data, most things are documenting getting slightly easier, but the one thing that's getting harder is communication from parents, and it's because the world's now writing AI letters of complaints and what have you, and teachers have to spend their time checking the legality of everything before they can even respond. So yeah, it's a fascinating world, and it's a challenging one for teachers, full stop.
Okay, so if I hear what you're saying about keeping your CV up to date and moving when you're in a good place, but I'm speaking to more and more leaders and teachers who are saying, I've just had it and I don't know what to do. I want to stay, but I need something to give me hope. What would you be saying to them right now? What can they do, in your opinion, to start helping themselves? And that may not be a kind question, because I understand that this is both an individual responsibility and a cultural shift requirement in schools.
It's a tricky one because I think, I'm supporting an ECT through my role as a tutor for a university. And I do this every year. And, when you have that years of expertise and experience, these things become automated and subconscious over time. But when you're a young or a wise teacher pivoted into a new career, perhaps you've got that kind of years of experience if you're older and entering the profession for the first time, where you know how to look after yourself. But if you're in your early 20s, when I was 19 going into classrooms, unqualified for my teaching degree, you don't necessarily have the metacognition or the resources in place, and especially if you're 200 miles away from your family, the kind of, as it is, social capital, I suppose. You don't have those resources of people to look after you, cook your Sunday dinner, wash your clothes, those kind of things. So suddenly everything's quite hard to look after yourself on top of an already exhausting career. So there's that's a challenge. I think we should, part of our teacher training programs, teach particularly younger teachers, I say how to look after themselves. That's quite a loose and simple thing to say, but maybe looking at the metacognition side, the social capital side. If you're moving away 200 miles from home, I know Teach First and organisations like that do consider these things when young teachers move away from their family unit. I guess from a perspective of hope, now 10 years working self-employed for my own small business, there is, my biggest fear is everything I do, I have to generate an income, and you always have to kind of justify your worth in some respects. But I guess I've learned after 10 years, one, to trust your diary, trust the academic year, trust your experience, trust that your good ideas will filter to the top, people will find them. Your best advocates are people that shout on your behalf, not yourself. And that there's an enormous stash of money out there in the wider world, despite the challenges we all face, and that people are exchanging, £1 every other day. So there's money out there to be found. And I guess all those stresses and strains that I have with financial problems as a small business, I guess when I've had really challenging moments, I've looked back and think, actually, for 10 years, I've survived, even through all those difficult moments when I don't earn any income in the summer holidays or the Christmas and things like that. So I've learned to trust my diary. I've learned to trust the forces of the wider world and the industry that I work in. And I guess the biggest remark I would make on the point of hope for people that are thinking, what can I do, is I get to work with such a wide breadth of people across the education sector. There are many people contributing, and I think this is why we first connected, wasn't it? That there are many people like ourselves and people that are teachers working in charities, people that are working in, ed tech companies that are creating resources for schools and teachers. There's so many people contributing to the education system beyond the Department for Education, beyond Ofsted and beyond Multi-Academy Trust, that without all of that, it would all kind of fall to bits. So there are a lot of things that teachers don't understand that they have from that hard experience as a teacher that they can use elsewhere, that people are desperate to have. So in terms of hope, if things do get to a point of crisis where you think, I need to hang my boots up and try something else, there are a lot of people out there that can help you transition for that. Lots of organizations, lots of kind of people like ourselves that have done that switch that you can talk to. So in terms of finding a new career, there's hope in that regard. But yeah, talk to people. Mental health wasn't a conversation 10 years ago. It is in abundance now. So, plenty of people that you can talk to.
Yeah, I suppose my hope is because I left when I burnt out and I got really physically very ill, and I was working 70, 80 hours a week. I mean, I had been for years, and small stress signals I ignored, and they got bigger and bigger until I had no choice because I got so sick.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so angry and frustrated that I had to leave a job I loved. I was deputy head as well, but I was passionate about my role and I did not want to leave. And actually, statistically, 70 or 80% of teachers and leaders are significantly stressed at the moment. And I suppose, we don't need to be living like that. We don't, I go into schools where they're doing things differently. And I would be saying to people, if you are in a school that is has that sort of mantra of work harder, do better. There are schools that don't have that do things differently, and the staff are thriving. And as a result, of course, the pupils are doing better. I mean, all the research backs that up. It's so obvious, isn't it?
Yeah,
Because
and
you
that
can't.
less is more. Old saying. There's merit in that, isn't there? And I think working hard. In some schools, I suspect it still exists, but it's a bit old-fashioned now that it's a badge of honor, isn't it? People will be surprised to know that if I squeezed all the things that I do into your typical working week, I would reckon I can get away with just working Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But obviously, I don't do the traditional working week anymore. Some days I am working on bank holidays. Some days I have to work on a Sunday. Some days I have to drive the length of the country on a Sunday night to get to a job for Monday morning on an inset day. So yeah, my working weeks change slightly, but yeah, it's a tough one because it's easy for us to say, you define your own working hours, but when you're new to teaching or you're working for an employer and you're being dictated these things, it's very hard to challenge that status quo. But yeah, there's lots of market forces at play, the Ofsted stuff, the exams and things like that. And that's where sometimes your good intentions to work fewer hours and things like that sometimes goes by the way, doesn't it?
Does, but there are schools out there who are watching Workload, who are watching the hours that their staff are working, and they're monitoring and they're putting things in place using amazing technology and AI and other things to help their staff to survive better. But I want to pivot for a minute and ask, because you look at teacher wellbeing a lot, and I wonder if there was one thing you could take away from schools tomorrow to make a really big difference to teacher wellbeing, what would it be?
Oh, good. My first thought was Ofsted, because I think when you're in the window, that conversation starts to happen even a year for some places. And then as the frenzy gets closer, it can be relentless. But yeah, I'm trying to think, let's go away from the obvious. What would it be? Well, it's got to be, you've got your marking burden. When I do workload surveys on teachers, it's marking, planning, behavior, and admin. And when you look at workload research, admin's always at the top. So you can define that by, phone calls home, report writing, someone's asked for a bit of data on another template version and all. So I think, yeah, let's get rid of every form of paperwork known to teachers in the globe and see what happens.
Oh, what do you think might happen?
Well, maybe we can just get on with teaching. Of
My
course you need to
goodness.
communicate with each other, and you can send an email here or there, but if I've not got that email etiquette and I'm saying, where's my stapler, and I'm sending it to all staff, it's a drain on everyone's time. And not everyone's got that memo yet, have they? That, there's still a bad bit of email. I get invited to online webinars with schools all the time, and people are replying, all staff, and to me, who's the guest, what's going on? What's this for? And it's just embarrassing and painful that we all have to suffer some of these poor habits. But, it's the nature of the profession. People are new to a certain career or new to a certain industry. And I've always said with teaching, doesn't matter how sophisticated we get with AI or pedagogy or cognitive science, we're always going to be working with a 4-year-old or a 15-year-old. And these children are always going to have the same humane cognitive ability. So we're always going to have to be working at that same level, regardless of external knowledge of AI or cognitive science or brain scans or what have you, because there's only so much you can do with a 4-year-old. So teaching forever will always be the same. And although you've got all this AI stuff going on with AI robots, I think, God forbid we end up in robot classrooms in a bit like a pandemic world. I hope that never happens, because it'll be the end of the world, not just the end of teaching. So I don't think that will ever be success. And I think we're all getting a bit saturated with AI and starting to see the downsides of it all. But yes, that would be my views on that, I suppose.
I would say that I started teaching a little bit before you. And I remember my first classroom in Brixton, where 33 children, 80% on the SEN register, very, very deprived, regular knives and razors and all this sort of stuff. And no help, nothing like a Senko or a teaching assistant or anything like that. So you just got on with it. But there was no paperwork, there was no tracking, there was nothing. All I was is going in every day. I was creative, I was exciting, I was energetic. Yeah, I was doing loads of fun planning, but it was all about what that group of children needed. And the progress was phenomenal, because we're going back to that thing that you mentioned right near the beginning about I was fully present, because the leaders and the teachers I speak to today, they're so overwhelmed with the paperwork, the parent complaints, the sort of ADHD forms that they have to fill in with 100 questions after school that day, and all these different expectations that, and that's aside from the marking and the planning and everything like that, they're actually not fully present in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I put out a thought the other day that some teachers are even filming themselves for their TikTok content as well. So you've got that kind of era too. But yeah, I think you make an important point about the SEN, needs. We've kind of always known it on the ground. We had an emerging crisis, EHCPs and things like that, pre-pandemic, and obviously we've got the SEND bill going through at the moment. Our schools are a mirror of society. So, wherever we are across the country, you're always going to be dealing with, SEN, anxiety, mental health needs, regardless of school context. I remember when I first stepped out and when I really started to widen my lens and get a macro view, I was very naive when I stepped out, and I went to a grammar school and I had my views and things like that. And I remember the head teacher saying, "Ross, we know what you think about grammar schools, but let me set you straight. We still face the same problems that you do in your school. Mental health is no barrier to school gates. All schools deal with problems," and that really put me in my box, and it really made me look up and look around. And having been to all shapes and sizes of schools across the UK now, it's made me realize that all schools do a good job. They are a mirror of society. So some of the things that you mentioned about razors and knives, those things happen on a daily basis on top of the paperwork. So yeah, it's a tough job, and we seem to choose in our country to do it on a shoestring budget, sadly. But yeah, we could make things a bit easier for ourselves. But hopefully the SEND bill might help, and particularly the social media one coming through as well.
Yeah, maybe watch this space. I want to finish with one last question, if that's okay, Ross, which is that for me and the work I do, it centers around teachers and leaders understanding their value, because I think that's the foundation of everything. So, from your experience, do you think most teachers and leaders actually know their worth? Do you think they know the impact they have? Or do you think we have a profession that is sort of basically chronically undervaluing itself?
Yes, all of that. I think it comes back to one simple point. On a daily basis, we take it for granted, but we are changing lives. And we can't win every battle, because there are people that will go through the education system having hated every second of school for lots of reasons. And it might just be one loose comment we say on the day. You're not very good at history, and you end up becoming a professor in history at Oxford in the future. And, there's all those kind of things. You hear all those stories all the time. But we also, all of us, get reconnected with a student from the past, from 10, 15, 20 years ago, who remembers a moment that we did or shared and things like that. And then you think, actually, you do make a difference. And, I always come back to my boy going through his school journey. His teachers helped him to read and write. I only did a little bit of contribution at home. They made the biggest difference. And that's something he can use for the rest of his life that will be of value for applications and what have you. So I think we forget those kind of things.
Yeah, I'm just fascinated by this because I spoke last night I had a group of 30 early years practitioners, leaders and apprentices, the whole range. And I said to them, can you tell your partner, the person you're sitting next to, one way where you have made a positive impact today? And 2 of them put their hand up that they could. The rest of 28 couldn't think that day where they had made a positive impact.
Right.
And that is really shocking to me because we know that our thinking is 80% negative, but being in schools, in nurseries, we're not noticing where we make an impact. And as you say, those staff helped your child to learn to read and write, but we're not noticing each day whether we make a child smile, whether we help a pupil get in through the school gate who's feeling anxious, or maybe inspire them with a piece of history. I don't know.
Yeah.
We don't notice, do we?
Well, since I moved to Yorkshire I spent my whole career in London, I've become addicted to gardening because, as you can imagine, there's lots of green space around. And trying to find a loose garden connection to teaching and learning. Every day I water my plants. Every day I cut a dead leaf off and things like that. And, in the classroom, there are a lot of things we do every day that we should be a bit more conscious of. And I know it's hard because it's a busy career, but, the good mornings, the positive names on the whiteboard, the how do you say this word and things like that, all these retrieval practice quizzes, that is you're tending to your garden every day. So it's easy to lose sight of the impact that you have on a day-to-day basis because things become automated and habitual and things like that. But people watching this that are still in the classroom and wanting reassurance, you do change lives. And I think it's important to remember that. We get all that kind of right-wing nonsense from the press and things like that we're just teaching kids facts and, mollycoddling them and whatever else. So I think it's important to remember that we do make a massive difference and we have to kind of ignore that noise and focus on, what gets you out of bed in the morning and why you became a teacher in the first place, versus that headache that it is an exhausting career.
Yeah, that's the reality, isn't it? Well, Ross, thank you for all that you've shared today. If people want to find out more about you, where would they go?
Teachertoolkit.co.uk is the easiest place, and I'm pivoting towards YouTube at the moment. I think I was a big cheese on Twitter for a bit of time, but as we know, for whatever reason, that platform's become a little bit toxic and algorithmic and things like that. So I'm not focusing too many of my efforts over there. So I'm switching over to YouTube. But the day someone turns YouTube off, I'll still be over on Teacher Toolkit. The blog's been there for 20 years now. Otherwise, yeah, come up to West Yorkshire and let's go for a walk and talk about teaching and learning.
Well, thank you so much for your time. And thanks everyone for listening. See you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for listening. I hope you took something of value from today. If you want to connect, I'm at rowenahicks.com, or I have a Facebook group, which is Preventing Teacher Burnout. So I look forward to connecting to you at one of those.